April 15, 1943. Newport News Shipbuilding, Virginia. Steam hisses across the docks as welders lift their masks, the clang of steel echoing over the James River. 1,000 men stand shoulder to shoulder, faces streaked with sweat and soot. At the center of it all looms something unlike anything the world has ever seen. 872 feet of gray steel stretching into the mist. The USS Essex is ready to launch. On the platform, Admiral Ernest J. King watches in silence, his cap tucked under one arm. A floating airport, one shipyard worker mutters, shaking his head. They said it couldn't be done. Below them, reporters scrawl notes. Somewhere, a Navy photographer loads a roll of film into his Graflex camera. And when the signal is given, when the massive hull finally slides down its greased ways and meets the water, the crowd erupts. The United States Navy has just given birth to its newest weapon, the Essex-Class fleet carrier. Across the Pacific, in Tokyo, the news reaches the Imperial Japanese Navy. In smoky conference rooms within the Naval General Staff Building, senior admirals gather around maps dotted with red and blue pins. Admiral Minaichi Koga, successor to Yamamoto, stares at the reports in disbelief. Another carrier? He asks sharply. Impossible. They can't build them that fast. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa smiles thinly. The Americans are soft, he says. They build with comfort in mind, not for war. By the time one of these Essex ships reaches the Pacific, the rising sun will already own it. The laughter around the table is confident, almost casual. The Japanese still command the largest carrier fleet on Earth. The Akagi, Kaga, Shokaku, Zuikaku, Hiryu, and Soryu had written their legend at Pearl Harbor and the Coral Sea. To them, the Essex looks like a latecomer, an overbuilt dream of an industrial giant still learning how to fight. But beneath that American hull lies something Tokyo cannot see: scale. A ship that can launch 90 planes at once, crewed by over 2,600 men, fed by factories that will never sleep. At Newport News, as the Essex's anchor chain clatters into the water, a sailor turns to his crewmate. "You think this thing can take on the Shokaku?" he asks. His buddy grins. "Give us 6 months, and we'll take on the whole damn fleet." By mid-1943, the Essex has joined the Atlantic for her shakedown cruise. In the engine rooms, firemen shovel coal-like oil into roaring boilers. On the flight deck, deck crews test arrestor cables and catapults under gray skies. Commander Ralph McMaster, Air Group leader, squints at a row of F-6F Hellcats lined up in formation. "These birds will change the war," he tells his pilots. And so will this ship. Every man aboard feels it. The carrier is a city on water. Machine shops, bakeries, radio rooms, a barber's chair bolted to the deck. Below, ordnance teams hoist 500-pound bombs into steel cradles. Above, aviation mechanics wipe oil from Pratt & Whitney engines, their hands blackened by labor and pride. When Essex steams through the Panama Canal that summer, she represents something no nation has achieved before: the power to bring airfields to the enemy's doorstep. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the Imperial Navy is bleeding. After Midway and Guadalcanal, 4 of its best carriers lie on the ocean floor. Fuel is scarce. Training programs crumble under the weight of attrition. Yet, in Tokyo, the illusion of superiority lingers. "The Americans are clumsy," sneers Rear Admiral Kasaka. "They build big ships because they cannot fight small battles." But the Americans aren't just building big, they're building many. In shipyards from Brooklyn to Bremerton, sparks fly night and day. Women riveters work beside men, their sleeves rolled high, their eyes red from fatigue. The Navy calls it victory production. By year's end, 11 Essex-class carriers are already under construction. In Washington, Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz studies the list. "We'll have 24 before the war's done," he says quietly. "Enough to cover the Pacific from horizon to horizon." No one in the room disagrees. November 1943. Tarawa Atoll. Dawn breaks over the central Pacific as Essex, Bunker Hill, and Yorktown, CV-10, cut through the sea in formation. Their decks hum with activity. Hellcats, Avengers, and dauntless dive bombers crowd the runway-like surfaces. Launch the first strike, comes the order. Engines roar. Catapults slam. Within minutes, the morning sky is filled with black silhouettes banking eastward toward BDO Island. Below, Japanese gunners scramble to their stations, clutching old Arisaka rifles and scanning the clouds for what sounds like a thunderstorm made of metal. From the Essex's flight deck, aviation machinist's mate Jack Talbot watches the last plane lift off. "You could feel it in your chest," he recalls later. "That rumble, that's when you knew the war was turning." For the first time, the Americans fight from the air on their own terms, coordinated, relentless, precise. The strike groups return at dusk, their fuselages streaked with oil, some wheels missing, some pilots gone. But the results are clear. The Japanese garrison is annihilated. Tokyo radio calls it a temporary setback. Privately, Admiral Koga fumes. "They bring airfields with them," he growls. "We cannot sink them fast enough." By early 1944, the Essex-Class becomes the backbone of Task Force 58, a mobile strike force commanded by Admiral Mark Mitcher. At sea, these carriers move like chess pieces, flanked by destroyers, cruisers, and fuel ships. Together, they form what one officer calls a city of thunder. The Japanese intercept reports of these task forces and can hardly believe them. 6, 8, sometimes 10 carriers operating together, more than Japan has left in total. "Impossible," one intelligence officer mutters. But as the battles of the Marianas, Saipan, and Tinian unfold, that word loses meaning. June 19, 1944. The Philippine Sea. From the deck of USS Lexington, CV-16, sailors squint into the rising sun. Somewhere over the horizon, Japan's last great carrier force is coming. Radio operators murmur coordinates. Radar blips bloom like raindrops on a screen. Bogies inbound, 200 plus. The air erupts. F-6F Hellcats streak upward, engines screaming. At 20,000 feet, the sky becomes a battlefield of vapor trails and fireballs. Pilots call it the Turkey Shoot, the largest aerial slaughter in naval history. Japanese pilots, many barely trained, charge headlong into a wall of American fighters. Within hours, over 300 are shot down. Not a single Essex-class carrier is lost. Below decks, sailors cheer every returning Hellcat that claws back onto the deck. Lieutenant Alex Vrashu, in his battered F-6F, grins as he steps out of his cockpit. 6 kills in 8 minutes, he says, almost apologetic. They just kept coming. By nightfall, the Japanese carrier Taiho and Shokaku are gone, victims of American torpedoes and their own leaking fuel lines. The Imperial Navy's air arm, once feared across the Pacific, has ceased to exist. On board Essex, Captain Donald B. Duncan studies the burning horizon. "That's it," he says quietly. "We've taken the sky." April 1945. Off Okinawa. The ocean is calm, deceptively calm. The Essex sails at the heart of Task Force 58, her decks covered in folded wings and restless men. Over the radio, kamikazes inbound. Bearing 120. Sirens wail. Anti-aircraft guns thunder. The sky turns into a storm of tracers. A suicide plane dives toward the fleet, flames trailing from its tail, and slams into USS Bunker Hill. The blast sends debris into the sea. Smoke blots the horizon. On Essex, sailors work silently, loading shells, tending to wounded comrades. The Japanese are no longer fighting to win, they're fighting to die. By the time Okinawa is secured, 24 Essex-class carriers have entered service. They've bombed Truk, leveled Formosa, struck Tokyo, and shadowed the empire into ruin. For every ship Japan builds, America launches 5. When the atomic bombs fall that August, Essex herself lies at anchor in Ulithi Lagoon, her decks lined with planes that will never need to fly again. In Tokyo Bay, as the surrender documents are signed aboard USS Missouri, Admiral Halsey looks out at the horizon, at the distant shapes of carriers riding at anchor. "They laughed at our floating airports," he says softly. "Now the world runs on them." The war that began with carriers at Pearl Harbor ends with carriers in Tokyo Bay. And the Essex-class, born in steel and disbelief, has rewritten the very rules of war.